was genuinely scared. I didn't want my name associated with the program or this company at all. By the time Friday rolled around, I was so stressed out because more red flags were being thrown at me than I could catch. I remember sitting in my office and an email popped up in my inbox asking to amend my offer letter. The request was for me to come into the office 1 full week every single month. I lived in Los Angeles. The company was based in San Diego. San Diego is a 2-hour drive one way without traffic. So I was very confused because, first of all, what do you mean you're amending my offer letter? And secondly, why was the amendment coming from finance? I was even more aggravated because I had turned down 2 other really great job offers, and those companies would not have required me to come into the office. And I don't even think those other companies would have tried to pull a fast one by offering me a remote job and then amending my offer letter. For what reason? I had 2 people in the C-suite pressuring me to sign that offer letter amendment. I refused and went about my day. Around 3 o'clock, my SVP comes into my office and they were just as confused as I was. They felt like they were being blindsided by these other departments. Personally, although I'm not a finance person, I think it's really unwise for a company that's still in the process of trying to garner additional investment dollars to require remote employees to come into the office. Because whatever that remote employee requires, flights, food, hotel, the company is required to pay for those things. This specific company could have used that money for preclinical studies to push the company further towards or further into phase 1 operations. It just wasn't financially wise to me. So my SVP and I started talking and they asked me what I would be comfortable with. Eventually, we decided that I would come into the office for 1 full week a month for the first 3 months of my employment. And then after that, I would only have to come into the office for FDA meetings. The whole situation was really alarming to me, but it wasn't alarming because of the offer letter amendment. It was alarming because why were finance, business development, and medical affairs so involved in another department's human resource matters? It was a clear sign to me that forward momentum clinically within this company was going to be really challenging because you have other people from different departments not doing their jobs while also hindering another department's ability to do their job. Prime example, a few weeks into my employment, my SVP assigned medical affairs, who happened to have a doctorate, to put together a presentation for a key opinion leader meeting, which are essentially meetings with clinicians in our field of study so we can get their buy-ins and their thought on our study design, among a bunch of other different things. A PharmD, MD, PhD, some sort of doctorate normally engages with clinicians and lead KOL presentations in case they have any treatment-related questions. Medical affairs did everything but that presentation. I ended up doing it, and doing it well, I might add, but I don't have a doctorate, so I really shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. And my SVP, I remember, they actually got mad at me for doing it because they kept saying I gave it to medical affairs. But medical affairs wasn't doing it, and I didn't want my boss to come back from their few days off and not have that assignment done. And I'm talking like this person in medical affairs was a younger person. They were old enough to be my parent. In another instance, I recall business development getting mad at me for putting together a regulatory affairs strategy presentation for one of our early phase programs. I wanted us to consult with the FDA via an Interact meeting. It was a biologic program, and normally the FDA allows for biologics within specific indications to engage in a pre-IND meeting, also known as Interact. So I wanted us to go to Interact, followed by a pre-IND meeting, and finally an IND filing to ensure that our application was robust and that our study would not get put on clinical hold. It was a complex program, so I felt like that was the best strategic path forward. Like I previously mentioned, one of their other studies had already gotten put on clinical hold, and I didn't want that to be the case for this other study. Also just not good for business to be announcing that so many of your studies are getting put on hold. To the investment community, it looks like as a company, you don't know what you're doing, and hey. Anyway, business development was upset because they said it was their job to give program-related updates to the C-suite, and they felt like I was overstepping. Huh? I was literally hired to do regulatory strategy and implementation, so what are you talking about? But again, so many departments were so involved in things that did not concern them. Anyway, after my first week, I get home, I enjoy the weekend, and when the weekend ends, my Sunday scaries were scarying. I felt so sick thinking about Monday morning. I was physically ill. No exaggeration, my bowels were out of control, I was burning up, and I felt like I had trouble breathing. Monday morning comes, and I was asked by my SVP to start supporting clinical operations in addition to my non-clinical and clinical regulatory strategy work. I had done this in previous jobs, so I didn't have a problem with this at all. The director of clinical operations knew how to do their job exceedingly well. I mean, they were really, really great to work with. They were a by-the-book person no shortcuts, no nonsense. And I honestly feel like I learned a lot from them, so I appreciated the opportunity, to be honest. They hadn't been at the company that long. When I started, I believe they had just hit their 5th month mark. I helped manage the contract research organization that we had, and I also helped with study startup activities for one of our phase 1 programs. There were 2 phase 1 programs. One of them we hadn't started yet, and that was what I was helping clinical operations with. The second one had already started, and it was for COVID. Remember what I said about companies trying to get in on that COVID market share? During the global pandemic, there was a massive pump of dollars into the industry. COVID really gave a lot of these biotech and biopharmaceutical companies hope that they should have never been granted. Not fact. I honestly feel like they were just trying to get in on the COVID market share. And this company that I was working for, Company C, was a company that had pretty much branded itself in dermatology, hair loss and skin treatments, orthopedics, cartilage regeneration. That COVID study was so mismanaged. And I actually feel like it could have actually gotten further along in development if other departments let regulatory and clinical actually make decisions backed by professional experience and understanding, but it just didn't happen. I would have one-on-one meetings with the director of clinical operations, and they would hint to me sometimes that those higher up were making it almost impossible for them to do their job the right way. I did not ask for specifics, I just listened. But the more and more that we would meet and talk, I started to pick up on what they actually meant by that. Regulatory, quality, clinical, and medical affairs, we would all have these weekly meetings. The purpose was to discuss strategy, risks, timelines, status of documents, because, I was also a medical writer, and a bunch of other stuff. It was just like department meetings so we could all understand what our role was in the development of each program and how we were moving forward. But what was so interesting about these meetings is, let's say we would meet on a Tuesday and we would make decisions about certain things for the program, backed by our professional experience. Wednesday would come along, the C-suite would meet, and they would reverse all the decisions that we had made. I remember after our Tuesday meeting, we made a decision. Wednesday came along, the decision was reversed. That next Thursday, I went to lunch again, because I was on site at the time, with one of my colleagues, and during that lunch, I looked at them and I said, this place is not gonna exist in 2 years because we keep circling the drain. It was just nonstop chaos. It was very, very hard to do your job. After one of our regulatory meetings, I had probably been working for the company for maybe a month at this point. I called my boss because the entire meeting was completely bulldozed by finance. You know those gnats that fly around and like you're swatting them and it's like, oh my gosh, why are you always around? Is it me? Is it me? Do I smell? Why are all these flies following me? Honestly, that's how I described finance while I was working at that company. They were everywhere for no reason, just existing to exist and disturb the productivity of other departments. I mean, my boss had 25 years plus of regulatory, quality assurance, and clinical operation experience. They didn't need another department that didn't have the same professional background as them, just buzzing around and lurking in the shadows. On that call with my boss, I had the inkling to quit. Like it was coming out. But before I could even say anything, my boss just kept thanking me and saying they appreciated me being a part of the team and joining the company and that they wouldn't know what to do without me. Because I'm there, it's easier for them to do work and get things done. I don't know how, but I bit my tongue and I didn't quit on that call. I mean, looking back, as I think about it now, and when I was thinking about sharing this experience with people on social media, I really did have an attachment to my boss. I didn't want to leave that mentorship. They are really, really good at what they do. And I just felt like learning from that kind of person, no matter the environment, is going to be really great for my career. It's true what people say, that you don't leave good managers. You leave a bad manager. And mine was a good manager, a really great boss, a really great mentor, because they even talked to me about stuff in my personal life. Like they would call me and just check in on me and make sure I was okay, ask me what I want to learn. They would recommend books for me to read to advance as a professional and a woman. So yeah, and they were a person of color. That's what the real attachment was. I wasn't even sure if I was going to say that, but that's what the real attachment was. I never have seen an SVP that looked like me. And so I didn't want to leave that. I mean, I try to think back to a peaceful day at Company C. No day was peaceful, not a single day. Everything was a struggle. And if you wanted to achieve something, anything, didn't matter what it was, even if it was a human resource matter, it had to be approved by business development and finance. I had other technical SVPs with PhDs telling me that they were afraid to go against business development and finance, even though they had ideas for how to develop the program clinically because they had their doctorate. They were afraid to state their own position or opinion, even if it was supported by fact, because they didn't want to be on the bad side of business development and finance. They were honestly bullies. And I say this with my whole chest, that they were the company's greatest roadblocks. No science background beyond undergrad for one of them, and another one had only ever had experience within that company, had never worked anywhere else. A little over 2 months after working for the company, I contacted a recruiter. I let them know that I was back on the job market. They did ask me why, considering I had only been at Company C for about 60 days and I just started working there. All I said was, I'm not really sure about the future of the company. Within a few days, I had a job interview. It was for a contract job, and when I was interviewing with the hiring manager, I told them that I had a full-time job, but I wasn't really sure about the company, and I wanted to make sure that I had something else just in case. They were definitely on the fence about giving me the opportunity because they weren't really sure how I was going to be able to do both. So after that interview, I didn't hear back for weeks. After a few weeks, the recruiter called me back and said the hiring manager had met with 5 other people and they didn't have the same amount of confidence in the other candidates that they had in me. So I got the contract. You know, because I had such a great relationship with my SVP, I really did want to be honest with them. I wanted to tell them about how I was feeling about the company as well as the contract job I had just been offered. So after one of our weekly department meetings, I called them on the phone. And honestly, because no day was peaceful at that place, I should have known that calling them wasn't gonna be a straightforward conversation of me just openly saying, hey, I got another contract job, I'm probably gonna be out the door pretty soon because this place is chaos. When I called them and they picked up the phone, there was a shakiness in their voice, a shakiness. And I'm like, hello? Like, is everything okay? What's going on? They proceeded to tell me that they had just gotten off of an executive team call and that the executive team decided that we as a company were gonna go forth with utilizing this principal investigator in one of our clinical studies. For this specific investigator, regulatory and quality were adamant about not using them. This topic about this specific principal investigator created a lot of contention within the company because every single day we were fighting. And that's what majority of our, weekly calls would be about. Obviously we had other things to discuss, but there was a lot of arguing about whether or not to use this specific principal investigator. I mean, we were going back and forth with the C-suite. The director of clinical operations went to the C-suite themselves pleading for the company not to use that principal investigator. And of course, they delineated all the reasons as to why the company should not use them. I personally went to my boss because we talk so often, and I pleaded to my boss to plead to the C-suite not to use that principal investigator. And when other C-suite members, such as, the one that was always flying around, would join our department meetings, I would outwardly vocalize that this is a bad idea and that we should not use this specific principal investigator. I mean, I was absolutely mortified at the thought of using a principal investigator that I personally knew had previously been investigated by the DEA, had recently been on probation with the Medical Board of California, had a documented history of DUIs, and was barred from practicing medicine in another state. That's an insane rap sheet for a principal investigator. I think there was some sort of personal relationship with the principal investigator and somebody in the C-suite. Because think about it, no reasonable company is gonna use a principal investigator for clinical research with that kind of rap sheet. My theory is that the principal investigator needed some sort of career win given their track record and all these run-ins with various government authorities. I'm assuming and alleging that somebody in the company agreed to let this principal investigator participate in the study in exchange for something else, allegedly. I don't know what the exchange could have possibly been because, like I'm saying, this is just a theory, and again, it's alleged. It's also alleged that the principal investigator would say a lot of jarring and unethical things. I was actually worried that they could jeopardize or sabotage the clinical data in some sort of way. I mean, it was so painfully clear that this principal investigator didn't need to be anywhere near clinical research activities. And it didn't matter if they signed a 1572 saying they were going to abide by FDA regulations. This was someone who habitually did not follow the rules, and it was documented in their track record. Every week, regulatory, including myself, and clinical operations would plead for the release of this principal investigator. Every single week. We didn't want to use them for the safety of patients, in all honesty. Every week, we would vote that we weren't going to use them, and then the C-suite would come back around and say, yes, we are. Can you please move forward with preparing this principal investigator's site for patients? Like, what? The day that I called my boss and I said that they had a shakiness in their voice, we talked for a really long time that day. I told them how I was feeling, and I told them that I wanted to quit because I felt like just about everything wasn't being done per CFR, which stands for the Code of Federal Regulations. I ended up telling them about the contract job I was offered. They completely understood why I contacted the recruiter, why I interviewed, and why I wanted to leave. And despite knowing that, they asked me if I could just hold on for a little bit longer because they felt like if I left, my other colleague who had joined the same week as me would leave, and then it would be impossible for them to move things along with the programs. So again, I didn't quit that day. But you know who did quit? The director of clinical operations the very next day. And it was so abrupt. And I'm thinking, no director of clinical operations is like the worst case scenario, especially since we were trying to move things further along with one of our phase 1 programs. The other principal investigator aside, we had other sites that we had to get up and running. A few days after the director of clinical operations quit, they fired the senior vice president of regulatory affairs, quality assurance, and clinical operations. And I was told that I would be reporting to the CEO. I'm thinking, what the heck is going on here? Everything is happening so fast. And why would you fire your SVP of regulatory affairs, clinical operations, and quality assurance right after your director of clinical operations just quit? It was such a bad idea, and it was very, very poor leadership, in my opinion. Right after the clinical operations director had quit, the SVP was still there, so they had asked me to start taking over some clinical operation responsibilities. Before I was just supporting, now I was leading. They wanted me to identify additional sites to participate in one of our studies. And actually, I had found one quite quickly, and it was one that was based in San Diego. Normally, a clinical research associate will go to a site that has been identified to qualify them. And you want to qualify a site to ensure that they are capable of executing the responsibilities that are associated with the protocol. So we needed our CRA to qualify this site. Well, the CRA wasn't available to qualify the site. Not at any fault of theirs. We were very, very unorganized, and we had asked them to do it so last minute. Since they weren't available, I was asked by my SVP to qualify the site that I identified. So with the SVP gone and the director of clinical operations gone, the CRA is busy qualifying another site and can't qualify the additional site that we had found. Everyone was kind of looking to me to start executing and delivering on responsibilities and not ask any questions, just solely execute. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that that's not how I do things. And I don't think that's how anybody should do things in clinical research. You should not do as you were told without questioning why you're being asked to do something. You should do as per ICH, as per CFR, as per GCP, and any other regulations and guidelines that are out there to help you do your job efficiently and effectively. Your job is to protect patients and the public. And honestly, I didn't have that many interactions with the CEO. So with the SVP gone and the director of clinical operations gone and the CEO looking at me to start executing on things, I genuinely don't think they realized that I took and take my job as seriously as I do. I wasn't with the company for long. So my 90th day, it came and went. And the week that my boss was fired, I actually started working my contract job. And I was contemplating quitting before or after I had gotten my name removed from certain things. The company received a grant from a government body, and I was the point of contact with this other governing body. I didn't want my name associated with the program or this company at all. So I wanted to stay with the company until I could get my name removed as point of contact with this additional governing body, as well as the FDA, because I was the secondary point of contact for all the INDs. I just didn't want my name on anything. I was genuinely scared. I was like, this place is gonna get audited. Once these studies start up and running and data is being collected, I feel like an audit will be looming. At some point, a day or so after my boss was fired, the CEO asked to have a meeting with myself and the director of medical affairs. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday. I distinctly remember we met on Friday. I'm working from home, so I dial into the meeting and it's on Teams. I don't have my camera on, but I can see the conference room camera is on, and it's just the Director of Medical Affairs waiting for myself and the CEO to join the call. As we're waiting for the CEO, the Director of Medical Affairs is trying to talk to me about the site I identified and the process of qualification. Now, like I said before, when you go to a clinical site to qualify them, you want to make sure that they're capable of executing all the responsibilities that are associated with your clinical study protocol. You want to make sure that they're not going to have any deviations, that they're going to be able to do things right. So there's a checklist that you take and you check off all the things that are good, you check off all the things that are bad, you check off the things that need to be fixed, and so on and so forth. The Director of Medical Affairs is telling me that I don't need to check off everything, that I should just pick a few things. When the qualification visit is over, the person who does the qualification signs the form, and that form gets logged. As the Director of Medical Affairs is talking, I'm looking around my apartment because my camera's off, making faces like, what? Keep in mind, this person is old enough to be my parent. It's not a young person. In my head, I'm thinking, what are you saying to me right now? Like, I'm actually perplexed. I didn't even respond. I just ignored them. So the CEO joins a few minutes later, and they start asking me a bunch of questions about the site I had identified. I'm giving a whole speech about how great this site is, how great the investigator is, and how this specific investigator had worked with large pharmaceutical companies, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and has conducted clinical studies similar to the one that we are doing. I mean, that's what you want when you're trying to qualify a site. It's one that's going to be able to enroll and screen patients in the patient population that you are seeking. The CEO tells me that when I go to this site that I should ask if we can add our own sub-investigator. I asked why, because I already knew this principal investigator had a bunch of sub-Is that they wanted to include in the study. The Director of Medical Affairs, CEO are rumbling and off about this same principal investigator I had thought we already agreed we weren't going to use. I try to sway them from the idea, and the CEO flat out tells me to strong arm the principal investigator into including this other doctor on the study. The CEO said it's our study and they have to do what we say. And I asked, well, what if they ask me who the sub-I is? And they flat out told me not to mention the sub-I's name, not to say their name, because I'm sure the site and the investigator would have been smart enough to Google whatever name I would have said, and they would have seen all the salacious things that I saw on Google about this specific doctor. I mean, my jaw dropped. My stomach felt extremely weak, and I knew in that exact moment that I had to quit, whether I got my name off of stuff or not. I called my mom panicking, I called my boyfriend panicking. I told both of them that I had to quit my job immediately. And you know, my mom was a little concerned because I was supposed to have jaw surgery, and you need health insurance for jaw surgery, or at least really, really good health insurance for jaw surgery. If I left company C, I would lose my really good health insurance because the contract job wasn't giving me insurance, but I didn't care. I honestly didn't care. I called the former director of clinical operations panicking, and they didn't say much. All they said was, you already know what to do because I already did it. I woke up Saturday morning, packed up all my work equipment, the swag, the screens, everything, and I FedExed it to the company. After that, I sent an email to the office assistant and CC'd the CEO and said, effective immediately, I no longer work here. I am not an employee. I didn't hear from anyone after that. A few days later though, I still didn't feel good about the situation because the problem was still there. They were going to use an investigator, or at least attempt to use an investigator that was ill-equipped to conduct clinical research. So I waited a full 5 business days in the hopes that somebody would reach out to me to conduct an exit interview, but nobody reached out. So I sent a long and detailed email to their board of directors discussing why so many people were quitting. I told them what the Director of Medical Affairs and the CEO had asked me to do in regard to the new site that I had identified. I shared all the unsavory details about the principal investigator that they were trying to use in the study with supporting links. And I also shared all the bad decisions that were being made within the organization on a day-to-day basis. I attached supporting documentation. This was a very, very long email, and I was absolutely scared to send it. I reread that email maybe 15 times before I hit send. I actually found the members of the board's personal emails because I felt like Company C was going to try and get my personal email blocked from emailing anyone internally. And lo and behold, after I had sent the email out, all the emails that were sent to any email at Company C's domain were rejected and bounced back. So when I got that bounce back email, I thought to call somebody on the board. There was someone on the board who had their JD, and I went on their website, their number was right there, so I just gave them a call. I specifically chose the person with the JD because 1, they're an officer of the course, so they're likely not gonna lie. And two, they're gonna answer their phone because it could be a client or something of that nature. So I called them, I stated my name and asked if they got my email, and they were kind of like perturbed, shocked to say the least. And they said, yeah, just because I got your email doesn't mean anything's gonna come of it. And all I said was, thank you for confirming receipt, and I hung up. After that, someone from the board reached out, and the following communications I'm unable to detail, but what I can say is a few weeks later, in the company's 8K that they filed with the SEC, I saw that the CEO had stepped down and that the chairman of the board position was given to somebody else. I also found out later from my former coworker that after I sent that email, the executive team had met for days, hours, discussing every point that I made in my email. And ultimately, they decided to not use that principal investigator.